All right, Luke chapter 1, starting verse 18. And Zacharias said to the angel, How shall I know this for certain? For I am an old man, and my wife is advanced in years. And the angel answered and said to him, I am Gabriel, who stands in the presence of God, and I have been sent to speak to you, and to bring you this good news. And behold, you shall be silent and unable to speak until the day when these things take place, because you did not believe my words, which shall be fulfilled in their proper time. And the people were waiting for Zacharias and were wondering at his delay in the temple. But when he came out, he was unable to speak to them, and they realized that he had seen a vision in the temple. And he kept making signs to them and remained mute. And it came about, when the days of his priestly service were ended, that he went back home. And after these things, Elizabeth, his wife, became pregnant, and she kept herself in seclusion for 5 months, saying, This is the way the Lord has dealt with me in the days when he looked with favor upon me to take away my disgrace among men. God has blessed the word. You may be seated. I actually had no concept that this is like the perfect Father's Day message. Yeah, it just was crazy. We are in process of uncovering the prequel to the real story. And the real story, Luke lays out for us in verses 1, 2, 3, and 4 that many accounts have been attested to, eyewitnesses and so on. And so I myself, it's fitting that I make the investigation and give you the information, excellent Theophilus, so that you can know the exact truth about the things that you have already learned. So he's going to be Luke is giving us the story of Jesus. The thing is, he gives us the prequel to the story. And the prequel, as we discovered in verses 5 through 17, is the story of the presentation of the forerunner to the Messiah. But in order to get to the forerunner, we have to get to the parents of the forerunner. And the parents of the forerunner, and this is the amazing story, is that they're a couple of old duffers. They're just old. I mean, that's the way Luke says it. He says that in, verse 7, and they were both advanced in years. And it's the linear tense, and it's like they stand here as youth, and then they march in that direction and just get older and older and older. And Luke tells us, and they were well down the road of years. So we have this old couple. And they're a great old couple. You'd want them as neighbors. They were the kind of people that if you took them to court, nobody would believe any accusation you made against them because they obeyed the precepts and the commandments of God. So they were good people. Well, the story unfolds in an interesting manner, and Zacharias was a priest, and the priests only got one shot at 1 week of their order in their entire life to go minister the incense in the holy place. One time, and that was only done by lot. So once your time was done, your name was never put back in the pot. So here we are. He's advanced in years. His lot is drawn in order for him to go minister in Jerusalem, not just minister in the temple, but he gets to go, and he's the only one that week, he gets to go into the holy place and pour I believe it was frankincense, onto the hot coals in the holy place that would waft the fragrance into the nostrils of God, so to speak. It was in that position that God decided to speak to him. And so he's doing his priestly thing, and whether you want to say he's on his best behavior or whatever, he's a good man already, so he's just making sure he's got everything right. And it appears that he poured the incense on and was worshiping, and all of a sudden an angel appears to him. And the angel has an announcement to make. The first thing, of course, is don't be afraid. It's like, okay, you got me there. And then he says in verse 13, do not be afraid, Zacharias, for your petition has been heard. And that's the tenses there are heard with the promise that it's going to be fulfilled. And you and your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you'll call him John. And then he goes on with the other things, and there's the promise that this guy, their baby, verse 17, is going to be the forerunner to the Messiah. So we've got good news, followed by good news, followed by amazing news, followed by good news, followed by good news. So what do you think? We get to verse 18. Sorry. And Zacharias said to the angel, how shall I know this? And this is going to come up 3 times in this passage. This is the embodiment of what the angel has just declared. How will I know this? All the things you just said. Then he gives his reason for questioning. And he says, by the way, the word how is, in the Greek, it's according to what. And there's, again, and I've said this in the introduction, that if there's more than one way to say something, Luke is always going to say it the second way. The way that almost nobody else says, or if they say it, they only say it once and then they say it the normal way. But for pretty much how Luke writes, he writes so specifically that when he says something like this, according to what, rather than the other Greek word, which is pos, which is how, he could have said how, but he doesn't. He says according to what. And what that is telling the angel is, it boils down to the same thing, how, but it's like, what sign, according to what? I mean, is there going to be a little tweet, or, all of a sudden my hair is going to grow? I mean, according to what am I going to know this? And he gives his reason for asking for a sign, and this is specifically how it reads in the Greek. I, on my part, am an old dude. It's the word presbyteros, which is elderly. So pretty much, and we've got enough white hair in here that I can't offend anybody. An old dude with white hair. Not you, Josh.
Oh, it's there.
Okay, not you. So, Zechariah says, I'm an old dude. Okay, so old dudes kind of know their limitations. Secondly, the wife of me has gone far forward in her days. In other words, and I told you, this is the same word we saw in verse 7, that they stood here in their youth, and they said, let's have a family, yay! And each passing years, let's have a family, yay! And they get far enough down, it's like, we should have had a family, yay! We could have, we didn't have a. So he says, I'm an old dude, and my wife, in essence, has moved past the childbearing years. And you see, Mr. Angel, I'm not sure you really knew that. I'm telling you, because obviously you didn't know that. You couldn't see when you looked at it. So, this, how, according to what will I know the embodiment of all that you have declared to me? How will I know it's true? because I'm an old dude and I'm married to an old lady. Get it? So you're going to miss it in the English because it's just not there. But Gabriel answers in kind to Zacharias. He says it this way. And answering, he said, and that's, Luke is going to be famous for that. It's a circumstantial participle. It's based in connection with the verb. So Luke is going to be saying that quite a bit. He's going to connect two words. And answering, which is what the angel's doing to his question, he says to him, this is what he says, I am on my part Gabriel. Remember, Zacharias had says, for I on my part am an old dude. Gabriel says, well, I on my part am Gabriel. Are you with me, Zacharias? So he's answering in kind, and he doesn't stop there. What are his credentials? He is one who stands constantly in the presence of God. And that is, the reason I say constantly is it's, when he says stands there, it's in the linear tense. So that's what, if you're looking for Gabriel, unless God has said go, Gabriel's going to be right there in the presence of God, ready to do his bidding. So what's unique about this is we look back at verse 8. Now it came about while Zacharias was performing his priestly service before God. So here's Zacharias on earth in the holy place, and he has to treat it as if God's presence is right there. So when he walks in, he's treating it as holy, and when he pours the incense on and the smoke goes up, he goes down, he worships, he gets up, he prays for Israel, brings the petition of peace and the Messiah and so on. And then he leaves the presence of God. Well, you put these two like this. I, on my part, am an old dude standing before God and serving him temporarily. And over here we have the angel Gabriel. I, on my part, am Gabriel who stands in the presence of God. Okay, so Luke has laid it out really, really well. So he says, this is what my job is. I was sent, and we've seen that word before. I believe it was in Peter. Very easy to make that sent on a mission, sent with a purpose. In other words, commissioned. I have been commissioned. In other words, I stood in the presence of God, and he said, go down and talk to Zacharias. I've been commissioned. I've been sent specifically to you to what? To speak. To speak. Communicate with you from the throne. And by the way, there's something here that I didn't catch until yesterday as I was going through. And you've heard me, in fact, all the way back in the Gospel of John, there's a word called pros, which is to, but it's also toward. And it's a little more, when you eyeball someone, that's to them. That's to. In the Greek, it's the dative. It's like right there. When it's pros, it's kind of broader. It's toward you. So yeah, it's still going to you, but it's kind of like I could almost be like this and speaking toward you. And it says here that I have been commissioned to speak toward you, and that's to me a generalization, and to bring good news to you very, very intimately, very specifically. So you, Zacharias, you non-papa Zacharias, are going to be a papa. That's what I was sent to say, to speak toward you, but to speak very specifically this good news to you. We came across that good news word as well Now I can't remember. I think it was Peter also, but it's hard to in the English bring it down because we wouldn't say it this way. I have come to evangelize to you these things. And the reason we can't use that is because we think of it in a different way. But what is evangelism? But it's bringing the good news. And so here is the angel Gabriel, who left the presence of God, commissioned by God to speak things to Zacharias, but very specifically the good news that he is going to be a papa of the forerunner. And once again, the angel Gabriel uses the word these things. Remember, Zacharias had questioned these things. How am I going to know these things? How am I going to know that this embodiment of all the things you just shared with me, how am I going to know it's true? And the angel Gabriel, I on my part, was commissioned to tell you this. These things that you have questioned. So it's a very big thing that the things I have been sent to commission to send to you, to speak to you, are the things that you have questioned in your unbelief. Because your reasons are natural. You're an old dude, your wife's an old lady. Therefore, you don't believe what I just said. You don't believe that those questions in your prayers when you were 21 and 22 and 23, newlyweds and then middleweds and then oldlyweds and anniversary after anniversary, still no kids. I'm telling you that was answered. Your petition was heard and it's ready to go. And you've responded to me in a natural way. And I'm telling you all these supernatural things involved. And so we have ourselves a situation here. In verse 20. And lo, and that's in there, behold. And it's drawing attention very clearly for Zacharias. The angel wouldn't have drawn attention in that way. It's something very unusual is going to be said. And lo, you shall be silent, that's mute, and unable to speak. Now, aren't those the same things? And pretty much, yes, they are. But if you're unable to make sounds, I mean, if I stood up here and went like this, you'd expect to hear, yay, or go team, or something like that. But instead, all you see is me going, nothing coming out. There's silence. So it doesn't matter what my antics are. There's silence. But when he says unable to speak, remember that draws a straight line over to what his commission was, what Gabriel's commission was. To speak to Zechariah, just straight in, very specifically. So judgment is going to be pronounced in light of Zechariah's unbelief. Lo, thou shalt be silent and not able to speak until the day when these things, and there's the third time in 3 verses, these things, the things I said in verse 13, verse 14, 15, 16, 17, all those things I said, they're going to take place, Zechariah. Whether you believe or not, they're going to take place. Until the day when these things take place or come about, happen, because, and now this is where the angel gives very specifically, and believe me, when you're confronted this way by someone, you're going to stop and take inventory because you did not believe my words. I was sent here to speak to you, and you did not believe my words. Does it get any clearer than that? An angel comes and says, hey, you're going to be a rich man, but I'm poor. So how will I know that? It's like, ugh. Well, very poor illustration. Which shall be fulfilled in their proper time. So we find something really interesting happening here. There is a consequence to unbelief. We know that in, I suppose, many different avenues. But in a faithful servant's life. So here's Zacharias, a faithful husband, a faithful priest, a faithful man to God, day after day, year after year, decade after decade, a whole lifetime. He's a faithful servant to God. And yet in this moment of, I'm just going to call it foolishness, God says, okay, it's time. Woohoo! Zacharias goes, well, according to what will these things happen? Because I'm an old dude, she's an old lady. It's like, seriously? Ugh. All right. Well, you'll know at the right time, because you're going to, until that time, you're going to be silent and unable to speak. Got it? We move on to verse 21. Luke brings us back to the people. Now, who are these people? Well, they're the ones from verse 10. The whole multitude of the people were in prayer outside at the hour of the incense offering. And remember, I told you this is either daybreak or evening. So it's either morning prayers or evening prayers. So it happens twice a day. And who knows which it is. Wayne Lidbeck's preference is in the afternoon, because there would be, I think, more of a multitude than in the morning. But that's just whatever. So the people who are gathered outside were waiting for Zacharias and were wondering at his delay in the temple. And stop and think about this. This was not meant to be a morning sermon, a morning service. When the people came to pray, they didn't bring chairs because they weren't going to be there that long. I mean, think about it. They show up, the priest enters in, he pours the incense on, he prays, and even if he's a long prayer, he's not going to be in there that long. So he comes out and he gives a benediction to the people, blesses them and blesses Israel and blesses God, and the people are dismissed. And the people are, he's been in there a long time. Well, he's new at this. Yeah, but this is a long time for anybody. And they're wondering. And I imagine there's whispering, although that would probably be irreverent. But the moment comes in verse 22. Zacharias comes out. He was unable to speak to them. I mean, no big surprise to you and I, because we just read that that's what was going to happen to him, and it happened. But when he comes out, and the priest, nothing comes out, there's a bit of a wonder there. And they realized that he had seen a vision in the naos. Now, that's not just a statement like, I went to the store and picked up milk, and then I went home. The people had a sense for how long it was supposed to be, and even if it took 8 minutes instead of 6, it's not like it took 20 minutes instead of 3. I mean, there's an obvious connection here that a conversation, which they wouldn't have been privy to, because there's no mention that, it only says that they understood that he had a vision. And by the way, that word probably come up later is also the word for apparition, but I didn't translate it that way because this is in the temple, and an apparition has more to do with scary stuff, ghosts, rather than, I mean, if you're in the temple of God, you're probably not going to see a ghost, you're probably going to see a vision. And this would be a huge thing, because keep in mind, it's been not just decades, but it's been centuries since there's been anything like this on this scale. So he comes out, he can't speak, they realize that he had seen a vision, and he kept making signs to them and remained mute. And it's like, I mean, what are you supposed to do? I don't know. I mean, it would be kind of funny to watch him, but at the same time, you have to figure that as he's standing inside and Gabriel goes away, it's like, you know, the phrase my dad always used was, "What now, coach?" It's like, and it can't even, there's no, it's like, I guess I've got to go out and finish this. So he goes out and nothing's the same for him. So whatever he does, they finally get the message and they leave. And notice this, that in verse 23, it came about when the days of his priestly service were ended that he went back home. The question is this anticlimactic? Okay, so he finished his service and then went home. Is that like, okay, big deal? Or does each passing day that he's there, because he'll be in there 7 days, does each passing day confirm the truth of Gabriel's declaration? I think that it took him a long time to assimilate the truth. Every day he goes in, and every day he goes out. Or every time he goes in and every time he goes out, he is confronted with the fact that he can't even mumble. He can't make a sound. There's nothing there. And he's confronted with that. And I imagine that the words, and by the way, as an aside, I think all these words, Zechariah would have been an old man, but somebody would have remembered these words that Zechariah would have eventually shared as an affirmation of all that had taken place. So he goes over the words in his head, he goes over what happened, and then he went home. Do you think he was a changed man when he went home? Well, if that's kind of hard to put illustration to. If Kathy and I were going to go home today and we didn't have any children, and angel of the Lord told us that we were going to have children, number one, my back already hurts. So, and other things, it's like, but there's just going to be something different, because I'm going to be a dad. So Luke, I think, does a brilliant job. If you look at verse 24, and after these days, that is after the days that Zechariah did his thing and then went home, Elizabeth, his wife, became pregnant. It's hard to know because Zechariah was unable to make a sound. He certainly knew how to write. That's not an issue, or not even a question. But, and there's no way to know whether he told Elizabeth that this is a sure thing, you're going to be pregnant, or whether he just said, "I love you, dear." Let's see, he would have to have written that. Hallmark card, whatever. But the fruit of them, there's no magic here. It's just that it was God's time, that the joy and the gladness of this couple would now be culminated in this pregnancy. And the thing is, she kept herself hidden away for 5 months. And honestly, I don't know whether that was a cultural thing or just the fact that, pastors make mistakes all the time. One of the mistakes I've learned never to do is go up to a woman and ask when the baby's due. I just don't do that. You'll never hear me do that, even if I know that the gal's pregnant. I'm not going to do that. And whether it was a cultural thing or whether it was, on her part, her eyes get real big and every day she looks down and pretty soon the baby bump starts showing, and finally she realizes at the end of 5 months that it's real, it's there. And she makes this declaration: "This is the way the Lord has dealt with me in the days when he looked with favor upon me to take away my disgrace among men." She did acknowledge that God was responsible for removing the disgrace of her barrenness. The wonderful work of God was acknowledged by Elizabeth. In the conclusion, God's promise, and in this case it's multi-layered because we haven't even hit the promise yet of the Messiah. He's not literally, he's not a gleam in anyone's eye at all at this moment. And yet we have the promise of the forerunner on its way. And we have the promises, and I look at verse 14 of chapter 1, "And you will have joy and gladness, and many will rejoice at his birth." Because eventually the news will get out that Zacharias was the guy who was struck dumb when the vision was told to him. And then that'll even play out more when John is finally born, and his name isn't going to be called Zacharias. Zacharias is going to give God glory and call him exactly what God told him to call him, John. So the promises are multi-layered, many-layered, and they're underway in literally a miraculous manner, and the people are going to notice. The people, when it ends up, the bottom line, God allowed this in this manner at this time to allow the people to be witnesses. Witnesses that something special has taken place. Now there's many things in here, many applications. I think in terms of the old preacher, he just faithfully does what he faithfully does. And one day he makes a big mistake. But God does not throw the baby out with the bathwater or the old man out with the mistake. God graciously, yes, he disciplines him, but he allows that man to continue to be a blessing and to move forward and to have ministry. It's a real encouragement to us. You and I are going to make mistakes every single day. Does God throw us away? He does not. And we need to believe. We need to test God in his faithfulness. We need to remember not just that he is the same yesterday, today, and forever, but that he will never leave us nor forsake us. And how many times do we question that in unbelief? So there's a lot here built into this Father's Day message, which was honestly didn't come to my brain until I was sitting there, so I didn't prepare it that way. But it ends up, that's what it is. And Zacharias is on his way, by the grace of God, to become the father, the forerunner of the Messiah. So praise the Lord. Father, we've got so much to be grateful for, and today we're still talking about just the process, but now the process isn't just being talked about, but now the process is literally in process, and there is an embryo a baby in the womb of Elizabeth. And it is Zechariah's son, and it's Elizabeth's son. And it's a miracle. And it was held off specifically until the right time. Lord, I realize that every day we question you about your timing. May we learn to recognize that it may be years before you say yes. Or you may have said no for a very specific reason. But any way we look at it, Lord, may we just give you the glory in waiting patiently upon you and recognizing that you remain God and we need to trust you. So go before us in that light. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.